Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I'm going to tell you a story about how my entire world, a world I had meticulously built over 15 years, was demolished not by one single devastating blow, but by two. The first was a financial hurricane of my own making, a rookie mistake born from ambition and a touch of greed that left me financially shattered. But it was the second blow, the one that came from the person I trusted most, that truly leveled me. It was a quiet, insidious rot that had been festering for years, hidden behind a mask of love and support, and the revelation of it was far more destructive than any market crash. It taught me that the person you share your bed with can be a greater stranger than anyone you pass on the street. My life with Alara was, for all intents and purposes, a testament to stability. We were the couple our friends looked to as the benchmark, the steady ship in the tumultuous sea of modern relationships. 15 years. We had met young, fallen in love with the kind of uncomplicated certainty that feels like a fairy tale, and built a life piece by piece. We didn't have a mansion or fancy cars. Our wealth was in our shared history, our comfortable routines, the easy silence that can only exist between two people who know each other's souls. Or so I thought. I was the dreamer, the one who would occasionally get swept up in grand ideas, while Ilara was my anchor. She was pragmatic, meticulous with our finances, the one who would gently pull me back to earth when my head was in the clouds. Every major decision, from buying our modest suburban house to planning our vacations, was filtered through her lens of cautious optimism. She managed our joint accounts, paid the bills, and tracked our investments, a small, conservative portfolio of mutual funds that grew at a slow but steady pace. I trusted her implicitly. She was the architect of our financial security, and I was the happy resident in the home she had built for us. My salary as a senior project manager was good, more than enough to live comfortably, but I always felt this nagging pressure, this desire to do more, to give her more. I wanted to accelerate our timeline, to reach that point of true financial freedom where work becomes a choice, not a necessity. That's when Kalen came into the picture. He was an old college friend, a brilliant, charismatic guy who had always been on the cutting edge of technology. He approached me with an opportunity, a ground-floor investment in his new tech startup, Ethelred Innovations. It was a risky venture, something in the AI logistics space that was either going to revolutionize the industry or crash and burn spectacularly. He showed me projections, data, a proof of concept that looked incredibly convincing. He spoke of nine-figure valuations and an IPO within 3 years. It was the kind of high-risk, high-reward play that Alara would have vetoed in a heartbeat. Her mantra was slow and steady wins the race. But I saw it as our lottery ticket, the one big swing that could change everything. And so, for the first time in our marriage, I made a major financial decision without her. I kept it a secret. I told myself it was for her, that it would be the ultimate surprise. I imagined the look on her face when I would reveal that her careful savings had been multiplied tenfold, that all her years of diligent budgeting had paid off in a way she never imagined. I started small, with a portion of my own savings that I kept in a separate account. But the initial reports from Kalen were intoxicating. The company secured a second round of funding. They were hiring aggressively. The buzz was palpable. My greed, cloaked in the noble disguise of providing for my wife, got the better of me. I started moving money from our joint savings, convincing myself I would replace it before she even noticed the next quarterly statement. Then I took out a personal loan, leveraging my excellent credit score. The number in the Ethelred investment portal grew, and with it, my fantasy of a new life. I was no longer just a project manager. I was a venture capitalist, a visionary. The stress of the secret was immense. I became withdrawn, constantly checking my phone for updates, my mood swinging with the speculative fortunes of a company Alara didn't even know existed. She noticed my anxiety, of course. She'd ask if everything was okay at work, and I would lie, attributing my distraction to a difficult project or a demanding client. She'd rub my shoulders and tell me not to work so hard, her gentle concern a dagger of guilt in my heart. The first crack in the facade appeared about 8 months in. A major tech journal published a skeptical piece about Ethelred's technology, questioning its scalability. The company's valuation dipped. Kalen assured me it was just market jitters, a hit piece planted by a competitor. He was so convincing, so full of unwavering belief, that I doubled down. I sold off a small portion of our safe, mutual funds, the ones Alara checked on religiously, and threw it into the fire, a desperate attempt to shore up my position and prove the naysayers wrong. That was the point of no return. The next 6 months were a slow, agonizing bleed. The promised product launch was delayed. Key engineers reportedly left the company. The confident emails from Kalen became less frequent, their tone shifting from triumphant to defensive. The pit in my stomach grew into a permanent resident. I lost sleep. I lost weight. My conversations with Alara became superficial, a series of deflections to hide the all-consuming terror that was engulfing me. I was living a double life, the stable, dependable husband on the surface and a desperate gambler underneath, watching his entire world circle the drain. The end came swiftly and without mercy. It wasn't a phone call or a dramatic meeting. It was a sterile, impersonal email from a bankruptcy trustee. Ethelred Innovations had been a house of cards, built on exaggerated claims and unsustainable spending. The investors were wiped out, completely. The loan, the savings, the funds I'd siphoned from our future, it was all gone, vaporized into the digital ether. I sat in my home office, the email glowing on the screen, and I felt nothing but a hollow, ringing silence. The weight of my deceit, my catastrophic failure, was crushing. I had not only lost our life savings, I had betrayed the one person who trusted me to protect our shared world. The hardest part was yet to come. I had to tell her. I found her in the living room, reading a book, a picture of serene contentment that felt like a cruel joke. I stumbled through the confession, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I laid it all bare, the secret investment, the loans, the lies. I braced myself for the explosion, for the tears, for the recriminations, for the righteous fury she was entitled to. I deserved it all, but it never came. She just sat there, her expression unreadable. She listened patiently, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. When I finally finished, my voice cracking with shame, she simply closed her book, placed it on the table beside her, and said, "Okay, just okay, no tears, no yelling." She got up, walked over to me, and gave me a brief, almost perfunctory hug. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice devoid of any real emotion. I was stunned. I mistook her calmness for shock, for an incredible display of strength and forgiveness. I thought, my God, what did I ever do to deserve this woman? She is my rock. Even now, when I have destroyed everything, she is here for me. That night I barely slept. My mind was a whirlwind of bankruptcy filings, credit score annihilation, and the daunting prospect of starting over from zero at 45. But a small part of me felt a sliver of hope, a belief that as long as we had each other, we could rebuild. Her calm demeanor was the foundation I thought we would rebuild upon. The next day, I began the grim task of financial archaeology, trying to understand the full extent of the damage. I needed every piece of paper, every statement, every account number. I went to the old filing cabinet in the corner of my office, a place I hadn't looked in for years. Alara handled all the paperwork. I pulled out the drawer labeled banking and started sifting through the meticulously organized files. And that's when I saw it. Tucked away in a folder for a high-yield savings account we had closed years ago was a more recent statement. It was from a bank I didn't recognize. The account wasn't a joint account, it was in her name only, Alara Alastair Thorne. The balance wasn't huge, but it wasn't insignificant either, a few $1,000s. But that wasn't what made the air leave my lungs. It was the transaction history. For the past 3 years, there had been a regular monthly deposit, an automated transfer from a financial institution I had never heard of. And then there were the withdrawals. Large, sporadic withdrawals. One for over $50,000 was dated just 7 months ago, right around the time I made my second desperate investment into Kalen's failing company. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it. Where did this money come from? And more importantly, where did it go? My first thought was that she had her own secret savings, a safety net. Maybe this was the money that would save us. But why was it secret? It didn't fit with the woman I knew, the woman who believed in total financial transparency. Driven by a new, cold dread that pushed aside my own shame, I started digging deeper. I went online to the county's public records database for real estate. It felt like a violation, a paranoid, desperate act, but I had to know. I typed in her name. I expected to see our home, the one we owned jointly. And I did. But there was another entry below it. A condo. A one-bedroom condo in a trendy part of the city, a 30-minute drive from our quiet suburban street. It was purchased 2 years ago, and the title was in her name, sole ownership. I stared at the screen, the words blurring together. My financial ruin felt like a distant, insignificant problem. This was something else entirely. This was a secret life, meticulously constructed and hidden from me for years. The calm, supportive wife who had hugged me the night before wasn't a forgiving saint. She was a stranger. And I realized with a chilling certainty that the money I had lost was only the beginning of my losses. I hadn't just bankrupted our future. I had stumbled upon the truth that our entire past was a lie. The shock of finding the bank statement and the property record was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless and disoriented. My own financial catastrophe, the one that had consumed my every waking thought for months, suddenly felt like a sideshow, a distraction from the main event. The real story wasn't about my foolish investment. It was about the 15 years I had spent living with a ghost, a carefully constructed persona named Alara. The woman I thought I knew, the pragmatic, honest, and loving partner, had evaporated, replaced by a calculating stranger who had been building a separate existence right under my nose. I spent the rest of that day in a fugue state, operating on a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and dread. I didn't confront her. I couldn't. The discovery was too raw, too monumental. Confrontation required a target, and I no longer knew who I was supposed to be confronting. Instead, I became a detective in my own home, a ghost myself, sifting through the ashes of my marriage for clues. Every object, every memory was now tainted, viewed through a new lens of suspicion. The late nights she'd attributed to her book club, the weekend yoga retreats, with friends I'd never met, the vague explanations for certain credit card charges she dismissed as girl stuff. It all started to coalesce into a horrifying mosaic. My naivety, my utter unconditional trust, felt like a character flaw, a blindness I had willingly embraced. The quiet dread that had been my companion during the investment fiasco was replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fury. It was a fury directed not just at her, but at myself, for being the complacent fool who never thought to look beneath the surface. I needed more information. The bank statement and the property deed were the what, but I desperately needed the why and the who. My first stop was the hidden bank account. I used the details from the statement I'd found and, with a bit of clever social engineering, pretending to be her and claiming I'd forgotten my password, correctly answering security questions about her mother's maiden name and childhood pet, I gained access to the online portal. The full transaction history was a roadmap to her secret life. The monthly deposits were consistent, coming from a payroll company linked to a consulting firm I'd never heard of. A quick search revealed it was a boutique marketing agency. She had a job I knew nothing about. For years, she had maintained the fiction of being a part-time freelance writer, working from home, bringing in a modest income that supplemented mine. It was a perfect cover, explaining her hours at the computer while I was at my demanding corporate job. But this was a real, salaried position, and the income was substantial. She was earning nearly as much as I was, and every single penny had been diverted into this secret account. Then I started tracing the withdrawals. Some were for utilities and condo association fees, direct debits for her other life. There were payments to high-end department stores, charges from restaurants I'd never been to, and airline tickets to destinations we had never visited together. But the largest and most consistent outflow of cash was a series of monthly transfers to another account, an investment account under a different name. My blood ran cold when I saw it. The name was Alastair Thorne, her maiden name. She wasn't just hiding money. She was actively investing it, building a separate financial empire while our joint finances, the ones she so carefully managed, were designed for safe, slow growth. She had been playing a long game, a strategy of immense complexity and deception. The $50,000 withdrawal I had noticed earlier wasn't a one-off. There were others like it. They corresponded with a timeline that made my stomach turn. One large withdrawal happened a week after I had received a significant promotion and bonus at work. Another happened shortly after my father passed away and I received a small inheritance, every penny of which I had immediately deposited into our joint account, trusting her to manage it wisely. She was skimming, bleeding our shared life to fund her private one. Armed with this devastating new knowledge, I knew my next destination had to be the condo. I needed to see it to make it real. I waited until the next morning, a Tuesday. She left the house at her usual time, telling me she was going to her yoga class and then running some errands. The casual lie was like a knife twist. I watched her pull out of the driveway, the familiar wave she gave me now a gesture of pure mockery. I drove to the address from the property record. It was a sleek, modern building in a part of town we never frequented. I sat in my car across the street for an hour just staring at it, the concrete and glass structure feeling like a monument to her betrayal. I didn't have a key, so getting inside was a challenge, but my mind was working with a desperate clarity. I noticed a cleaning service van parked outside. I waited until a cleaner exited the building, propping the main door open with a small wedge as she went to her van. That was my chance. I walked in, my heart pounding against my ribs, feeling like a criminal in my own life. I took the elevator to the 7th floor, the address on the deed burned into my memory. Apartment 7B. I stood before the door, my hand trembling as I reached out and touched the wood. It felt like a portal to another dimension. I had no plan, no idea what I would do. But as I stood there, I heard something from inside. Voices. A man's laugh, low and relaxed. And then hers, her laugh. It was the same bright musical sound that had been the soundtrack to my life for 15 years. But hearing it here, in this place, it sounded alien and monstrous. My rage, which had been a cold, calculated thing, ignited into a white-hot inferno. I didn't knock. I didn't think. I just acted. I kicked the door. My foot slammed against the lock, the wood splintering with a deafening crack. I kicked again, putting all my grief, my fury, and my shattered trust into the blow. The door flew open. And there they were. The scene was so domestically cliché it was almost comical. Alara was in the kitchen, wearing an apron over a silk blouse, handing a cup of coffee to a man sitting at a small breakfast bar. He was handsome in a bland, corporate way, dressed in an expensive suit, his back partially to me. They both froze, their heads snapping towards the ruined doorway. The man's face was a mask of confusion and alarm, but Alara, her expression was something I will never forget. It wasn't shock. It wasn't fear, it was annoyance. The kind of look you give a waiter who brought the wrong order. She looked at me, standing amidst the wreckage of her door, and her first words to me were not an explanation or an apology. They were, honestly, did you have to be so dramatic? This is a very expensive door. The man, recovering his composure, stood up. Who the hell are you? He demanded, stepping in front of her protectively. I ignored him. My eyes were locked on Alara. 15 years, I said, my voice hoarse. 15 years and you couldn't even give me the truth, she sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of exasperation. She took off the apron and placed it on the counter. I was going to, she said, her voice chillingly calm. I was waiting for the right time. Your little financial adventure just accelerated the timeline. She looked from me to the man. Declan, this is my husband, or well, my soon-to-be ex-husband. Declan looked at me, then back at her, a flicker of something, was it pity, in his eyes. The whole situation felt surreal, like a poorly written play. I had expected a dramatic confrontation, tears, a confession. I got corporate jargon and mild irritation. It was then I understood. This wasn't a passionate, sordid affair. This was a business merger. Her life with me had been a long-term investment, a starter home. Declan and this condo were the upgrade, the portfolio she had been building in secret all along. My financial ruin wasn't a tragedy they would weather together, it was her exit strategy. My failure gave her the moral high ground she needed to execute a plan that had been in motion for years. "The money, Alara," I said, my voice dropping to a low whisper. "My inheritance, the bonuses, our savings." She had the audacity to shrug. "I considered it severance pay," she said coolly. "For my years of service, for managing your life and our finances while you were busy playing the big shot. I made better investments than you did, clearly. I backed a winner." She gestured towards Declan, who preened slightly. I looked around the condo. It was tastefully decorated, impersonal, like a luxury hotel suite. There were no photos of us, no trace of our shared life. This was her real home. The house in the suburbs, the life she had with me, was just a temporary base of operations. The man, Declan, finally spoke again, his tone shifting from aggressive to condescending. "Look, mate," he said, "I think it's time for you to go. This is obviously a private matter. We can have our lawyers sort out the details." The word lawyers snapped me back to reality. He was right. This was no longer a marriage to be saved. It was a hostile takeover, and I was being liquidated. I looked at Alara one last time, searching for a flicker of the woman I married, a hint of remorse or sadness. There was nothing, just a cold, hard polish. She was a stranger, and she had been for a very, very long time. I turned and walked away without another word. I walked out of the splintered door, down the hallway, into the elevator, and out into the bright sunshine, which felt offensive in its cheerfulness. The fury had subsided, replaced by an unnerving, profound emptiness. I hadn't just lost my wife and my money. I had lost my past. My entire history was a fiction she had allowed me to believe in. As I drove away from the monument of my own ignorance, I realized my bankruptcy was a gift. It was the catalyst that had forced me to open the filing cabinet. Without my spectacular failure, I would have continued living in the comfortable lie, a happy, clueless fool, while she bled me dry and lived her real life somewhere else. Hitting rock bottom had saved me. It had shown me the truth. But as I merged onto the highway, with no destination in mind, a new and terrifying thought began to form. I had seen her secret bank accounts and her secret property, but those were just the financial betrayals. What other secrets was she hiding? How deep did this deception really go? My investigation into my own life had only just begun. The drive away from that condo was a blur. I have no memory of the roads I took or the traffic I navigated. My mind was a chaotic slideshow of splintered door frames, the condescending look on Declan's face, and the cold, dismissive finality in Alara's eyes. Her words, "I considered it severance pay," echoed in my skull, a brutal epitaph for a 15-year marriage. The emptiness I felt was a physical thing, a hollow ache in my chest where a life used to be. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene, the carefully curated stage for her long-running performance. Every object within its walls, the photos on the mantelpiece, the furniture we'd picked out together, the damn spice rack she'd insisted on alphabetizing, was a prop in a play where I was the only one who didn't know my lines. Instead, I drove to the one place that felt appropriately desolate, a cheap motel off the interstate, the kind with flickering neon signs and questionable stains on the carpet. It was a place for transients, for people in between lives, and that's exactly what I was. I paid for a week in cash, the last of the emergency money I had in my wallet, and locked myself in. For the first 48 hours, I did nothing. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling, letting the full weight of the betrayal wash over me. It came in waves. First, the searing rage, a fantasy of revenge and destruction. Then the crushing grief, a profound sorrow for the man I was just a week ago, The naive husband who believed his biggest problem was a bad investment. Finally, and most terrifyingly, came the paranoia. If she could fake an entire life for years, what else was a lie? Was our courtship a lie? Was our wedding day a performance? Did she ever love me, or was I just the initial investor in the startup of her life, to be cast aside when a better offer came along? This paranoia became my new engine. My own financial ruin had become secondary. My credit score was shot, I was facing bankruptcy, and I was technically homeless, but none of that mattered as much as uncovering the full extent of her deception. My life had been rewritten without my consent, and I was determined to read every single page of the new version, no matter how painful. My motel room became a war room. I bought a cheap laptop and a burner phone. My first objective was to understand the scope of her financial network. I had seen her secret bank account and investment portfolio, but I suspected that was just the tip of the iceberg. Using the information I had, I started to build a digital profile of the woman who was my wife. I became an expert in online skip tracing, piecing together public records, social media breadcrumbs, and data broker reports. It turned out Declan was Declan Rafferty, a senior partner at a private equity firm. He was wealthy, powerful, and according to a few society blogs, very much married. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complex web of deceit involving multiple families. I found Alara's professional profile on a networking site under her maiden name, of course. Her resume was impressive. She wasn't just a consultant, she was a senior strategist at the marketing firm, a position she had held for over 5 years. I cross-referenced the dates. She had started this high-powered, full-time job less than 6 months after we had a long, heartfelt conversation where she claimed she was feeling burned out by the corporate world and wanted to focus on her passion for writing from home. She had cried, telling me how much she appreciated my support in allowing her to step back. It was all a calculated lie, a perfectly crafted narrative to give her the freedom and lack of oversight she needed to build her second life. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. I found that the condo wasn't her only secret asset. She was a part owner of a small art gallery downtown, a silent partner in an LLC with two other individuals I didn't know. She had a safety deposit box at a different bank, a detail I found by tracing a small annual payment from her secret account. What could be in there? Cash? Documents? A completely different identity? The possibilities were dizzying. The true turning point in my investigation came from an unexpected source: my own past. While going through the digital files on our old home computer, which I had backed up to a cloud service years ago, I found a folder of old photos from a trip we took to Italy about 6 years prior. It was supposed to be a second honeymoon. As I clicked through the images of us smiling in front of the Colosseum and drinking wine in Tuscany, the memories felt like a punch to the gut. But then I noticed something odd. In the background of several photos taken in different cities days apart was the same man. It was Declan. I had never met him, never knew he existed, yet there he was, a ghost in the background of my happiest memories. They hadn't just met recently. They had a history, a long one. This wasn't a new development. It was the culmination of a long-term plan. She hadn't left me for him. She had been with him in some capacity all along. This realization shifted my mission from one of discovery to one of dismantlement. It was no longer enough to know the truth, I had to use it. She had leveraged my trust and our shared assets to build her empire. Now I would leverage the truth to tear it down. I was a project manager by trade. I specialized in identifying risks, defining objectives, and executing complex plans. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of my old self return. I would approach the destruction of her secret life as the most important project I had ever managed. My first move was strategic and surgical. I started with Declan's wife. Finding her wasn't difficult. Her name was Genevieve Rafferty, and she was a prominent figure in the city's philanthropic circles. She had a public profile, a digital footprint that was easy to follow. I didn't want to just be an anonymous tip. That could be dismissed as a prank or a lie from a disgruntled employee. I needed irrefutable proof. I compiled a dossier. It was cold, professional, and utterly damning. I included the property deed for the condo under Ilara's name, screenshots of the background photos from our Italy trip showing Declan, and the masterstroke financial records. I hired a forensic accountant, a discreet professional I paid with the last of my borrowed funds, who was able to trace some of Ilara's investment capital back to offshore accounts directly linked to Declan's firm. It wasn't just an affair, it was a financial conspiracy. She wasn't just his mistress. She was his business partner in a scheme that likely involved hiding assets from his own wife in preparation for their own divorce. I packaged it all, the photos, the deeds, the financial traces, and sent it anonymously to Genevieve Rafferty's personal lawyer, whose contact information I found on the board of a charity she chaired. I didn't send it to her directly. I sent it to the person whose job it was to protect her interests. A lawyer would be obligated to take it seriously. 2 days later, the first tremor hit. A friend from my old life, someone who wasn't aware of my situation, called me. He was a stockbroker and mentioned in passing that there was chaos at Declan's private equity firm. Rumors were swirling that Rafferty was being forced to take a sudden leave of absence, that the board was in an emergency session, and that his wife, a major shareholder through her family's trust, had frozen his assets pending an internal investigation. My anonymous package had landed with the force of a bomb. I felt a grim satisfaction, but it was fleeting. This was only one front in the war. My next target was Ilara herself. Confronting her in person was pointless. She was immune to shame or emotional appeals. I had to hit her where she lived in her meticulously constructed financial world. I knew she was in the process of divorcing me, expecting to walk away with half of what little remained of our official joint assets, while her secret empire remained untouched. She assumed I was a broken, defeated man, too consumed with my own failure to look any closer. She had underestimated me. I filed my own response to her divorce petition. But I didn't just contest the terms. I filed for a full financial discovery, but instead of just our joint assets, my lawyer, a hungry young shark I'd hired who smelled blood in the water, specifically named the secret bank account, the condo, the LLC for the art gallery, and the investment portfolio under her maiden name. We subpoenaed the records for all of it. This was a declaration of war. It was telling her, I know everything. The legal battle would be bloody and expensive, but the discovery process was my weapon. It would force her secret life into the light, making it a matter of public record. Her carefully maintained separation of worlds was about to come to a violent, crashing end. The night after my lawyer filed the paperwork, my burner phone rang. It was her. Her voice was no longer calm and condescending. It was a venomous hiss. "What do you think you're doing?" she snarled. "You're supposed to be broken. You're supposed to be crawling under a rock. You have no idea what you're meddling with." "I'm just protecting my interests, Ilara," I said, my voice steady. "The same way you've been protecting yours for the last decade." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and in that silence I knew I had finally, truly broken through her composure. The game had changed. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the threat. "You will regret this," she whispered and hung up. I knew she was right. People like her and Declan didn't just lose gracefully. They were powerful, ruthless, and had far more resources than I did. I had poked a hornet's nest with a stick, and they were going to come after me with everything they had. But as I sat there in my dingy motel room, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, I wasn't afraid. For the first time in a long time, I felt something other than pain or rage. I felt a sense of purpose. I had lost my past and my present, but the future was now a battlefield, and I was determined to be the last one standing. Ilara's threat was not an empty one. The moment my legal filings landed, her carefully separated worlds collided with the force of a particle accelerator. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Her first move was to try and paint me as unstable, a vengeful husband spiraling out of control after a professional failure. Her lawyers filed motions claiming I was harassing her, that my financial claims were the fantasies of a broken man looking for a scapegoat. They tried to have my subpoenas thrown out, arguing they were a baseless fishing expedition. They portrayed her as the long-suffering wife who had finally found the courage to leave her reckless, mentally unraveling spouse. It was a masterful piece of fiction, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed like it might work. She had the high-priced legal team, the veneer of respectability, and years of practice in the art of manipulation. I was living in a motel, my professional reputation in tatters and my credibility hanging by a thread. But I had one thing she didn't: the unadulterated, verifiable truth. The legal battle became a war of attrition. Her lawyers buried mine in paperwork, filed motion after motion to delay the discovery process, and bled me of the little money I had left. I sold my car. I maxed out a new, high-interest credit card I'd managed to get. I borrowed money from the few family members I had left, humiliating myself by admitting the full scope of my disaster. Every dollar went to my lawyer, who, to his credit, fought like a wolverine. He saw what I saw, that this wasn't a standard divorce. It was a fraud case masquerading as a domestic dispute. The tide began to turn when the first of the subpoenas came through. The bank was legally compelled to turn over the records for her secret account. The statements laid it all out in black and white: the hidden income, the property payments, the transfers to her shadow investment fund. My baseless fantasy suddenly had the weight of official bank records. Next came the records from the county clerk, proving sole ownership of the condo. Then the LLC registration for the art gallery. With each piece of evidence, the narrative she had so carefully constructed began to crumble. The real blow, however, came from an unexpected front. Genevieve Rafferty, Declan's now scorned wife, was not a woman to be trifled with. Armed with the dossier I had provided, her legal team had launched their own scorched earth campaign. Declan was not just facing a divorce. He was facing an internal investigation at his firm for misuse of company funds and potential SEC violations related to the offshore accounts he'd used to fund his life with Alara. He was radioactive. Suddenly, Alara's powerful partner was a liability. The money taps were turned off. The support system she had spent years building was now focused on its own survival. Declan cut her loose, professionally and personally, in a desperate attempt to save himself. It was a lesson in the brutal pragmatism of their world. Loyalty only extends as far as mutual benefit. Alara was left isolated, her secret life exposed and her powerful benefactor gone. She was forced to fight me on her own, using the very funds she had fought so hard to conceal. The pressure mounted. Her marketing firm, having been dragged into the legal mess through subpoenas, suspended her. The friends from her secret life, the ones who frequented the art gallery and the fancy restaurants, distanced themselves from the unfolding scandal. Her meticulously crafted world was imploding. The final confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. After months of legal skirmishes, with a mountain of evidence stacked against her, her lawyer called mine and asked for a settlement meeting. We met in a sterile conference room, halfway between our two worlds. She looked smaller, diminished. The cold, confident polish was gone, replaced by a brittle, weary anger. Her lawyer did most of the talking, but her eyes never left mine. They were filled with a pure, undiluted hatred. There was no remorse, no apology. In her mind, she was still the victim, and I was the villain who had destroyed her masterpiece. The settlement was a complete capitulation on her part. I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to leave her with nothing, as she had planned to do to me. That would have made me her equal. Instead, I wanted justice. I wanted to reclaim what was mine, not just the money, but the years of my life she had stolen. We divided the assets, but this time, all the assets were on the table. The secret accounts, the condo, the stake in the art gallery, the investment portfolio. When it was all liquidated and accounted for, it turned out she had siphoned off more than triple the amount I had lost in my foolish Ethelred investment. My half of her hidden empire not only covered my debts but left me with enough capital to start again. The house, Our marital home was sold. I couldn't bear to set foot in it again. As part of the agreement, she had to sign a sworn affidavit admitting to the existence of the hidden assets, effectively torpedoing her credibility for any future legal or financial dealings. It was a quiet, bureaucratic end to a decade-long lie. After the papers were signed, I walked out of that conference room and didn't look back. The legal battle was over, but the personal one was just beginning. I had the money, I had my freedom, but I was a ghost. My past was a lie, and my future was a blank, terrifying canvas. I moved to a different city, a place where I had no history. I got a small apartment and a simple job, something far removed from the high-pressure corporate world that had defined me. I spent the first year in a self-imposed exile healing. I went to therapy. I read books. I walked for hours every day. I had to deconstruct the man I was and figure out who was left underneath. I had to learn to trust my own judgment again, to believe that not everyone was wearing a mask. The turning point came on a random Tuesday morning, almost 2 years after I'd walked out of that lawyer's office. I was in a coffee shop, and I saw a young couple at a nearby table, excitedly sketching out plans for a small business on a napkin. They were full of hope and a touch of fear, the same way I had been all those years ago. But instead of feeling a pang of grief, I felt a flicker of something else. Inspiration. I realized that my catastrophic failure with Ethelred and Alara's profound betrayal had taught me an invaluable, albeit brutal, lesson. I had learned to read the fine print of both contracts and people. I had learned the difference between calculated risk and blind faith. And I had learned that hitting rock bottom gives you the most solid foundation imaginable to build something new. I used the settlement money to do something I had always dreamed of. I started my own small consulting firm, helping small business owners avoid the very mistakes I had made. I helped them vet partners, scrutinize deals, and build strategies based on transparency and integrity. It's not a glamorous life, but it's an honest one. It's a life I built myself, from the ground up, on a foundation of hard-won truth. I don't know what happened to Alara or to Declan. Once their names vanished from my legal documents, I made a conscious choice to never type them into a search engine again. They are ghosts from a past life, a cautionary tale I carry with me but no longer allow to define me. My world was destroyed, but in the ruins I found myself. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.